This is Stories from the States. I'm Chris Fitzsimon. Here at States Newsroom, we know there's a lot going on around the country in every state capital, and thank you for being here. Today, we're talking about the fight for fair funding for historically black colleges and universities, or HBCUs. For decades, government funding was withheld from public HBCUs, like Tennessee State University. States across the South, like Tennessee, have grappled with the question, what could be possible if those debts were repaid? To help us answer that question, we're handing the reins over this week to our colleagues from Nashville Public Radio and the Tennessee Lookout. They put together The Debt to trace Tennessee State University's decades-long fight for fair funding. It's led to lawsuits, university mergers, a student-led hunger strike, and even a lawmaker's discovery of his own father's research on underfunding. We'll let journalist Emily Siner and Camelia Burris take it away.
I'm Camelia Burris.
And I'm Emily Siner.
And this is The Debt.
The year is 1968. It's less than 2 months after Martin Luther King was assassinated. And a black law student named Rita Geyer decides to do something bold. She is taking the state of Tennessee to court.
Maybe I was naive, but I really believed in the law.
Rita was in school at Vanderbilt in Nashville and teaching a class across town at Tennessee State University.
Tennessee State at that time, it was very dilapidated in my sense.
TSU is the state's only historically black public university. And even though separate but equal was no longer the law of the land, it was obvious to her that this school was still being treated like a second-class institution.
And I, of course, was a law student and was learning all about civil rights and the legal remedies that were possible.
Rita Geyer was clerking for a white civil rights lawyer in town, and together they crafted a legal complaint. It claimed the state of Tennessee wasn't giving TSU enough money for its salaries, its library, its buildings, because it was a predominantly black university.
The motivation was to get more resources and equal facilities.
Almost every southern state would go on to have its own version of the Geyer case, battling over the desegregation of higher education. But the Geyer case in Tennessee was the longest-running lawsuit on this topic in the entire country. It lasted for 38 years, from 1968 all the way to 2006. And it all started because the state was not properly funding TSU.
And what's so interesting is that even though I grew up here and I have a lot of family that went to TSU, I've actually never heard of the Geyer case before.
I've heard that a lot from people, but the reason why I've been obsessed with it since I found out about it is that this case led to so many groundbreaking events that really changed the trajectory of public higher education. The merger of a white and black university.
This was the first time at any level where the black institution survived.
A contentious debate about whether public universities are allowed to have a racial identity. A dramatic student hunger strike.
We are talking about freedom and justice for Tennessee State University, which has been long overdue.
And most of all, Rita Geyer's lawsuit in 1968, from what I can tell, is the first time that someone was able to force people in power to acknowledge that the state owed a debt to TSU. It asked this question, what do you owe a black university that you've shortchanged for so many years?
And that question still hasn't been answered.
From Nashville Public Radio and the Tennessee Lookout, this is The Debt. It's a story about the epic and unfinished attempts to repay Tennessee's only black public university.
I'm Camelia Burris, education reporter at Nashville Public Radio.
And I'm Emily Siner, a journalist in Nashville who's covered both legal history and higher education.
We're actually bringing you two stories, one about a long-running court case that tried to give TSU more resources, and the people who nearly got taken down by it.
They started investigating the hell out of us.
The other, the story of a current lawmaker determined to tally just how much was taken from TSU.
The discovery that I made was made almost 50 years ago.
And we're telling this story now because in recent years, the state acknowledged that it does have a monetary debt to TSU. But we need to understand how we got here.
We're also telling this story now because our entire country is having an intense debate at this moment about race and higher education.
Breaking news from the Supreme Court. The court has just issued a landmark ruling on affirmative action.
Elite universities are striking deals with the Trump administration to save their funding by agreeing to stop considering race in admissions and hiring and scholarships. People in power are increasingly saying that the debt to Black people for the wrongs of the past has been paid.
We've ended the tyranny of so-called diversity, equity, and inclusion.
But others say it's not nearly enough.
This is about a debt that the state owes, and states have to pay their debts.
And Tennessee State has been at the center of this debate for decades.
Tennessee State University, family, friends, and alumni. I've got one question for you. Are you ready for the show?
For someone who did not grow up around HBCUs, like me, what do you think is important for people to understand about them?
Well, one thing is that even though it's a historically Black university or college, anyone can attend. They were started because Black people couldn't attend the predominantly white schools, but we've always been open to everyone. And I think what I like most about HBCUs, and I found at the one I attended and when I talked to friends who've gone to other ones, is that it feels more like a family.
It don't matter if you went to Vanderbilt, Fisk, Meharry.
Just the energy. It is no homecoming like Tennessee State University.
It's a family reunion, you know.
Growing up, what kind of influence did TSU have on your life here in Nashville?
It was a huge influence. My mother went there, my aunts and uncles, my cousins, so it's like a little bit of a reunion. I grew up going to summer camps there. I remember even when I went to college, I came back for TSU's homecoming. I came back for the John Merritt Classic. It's like a time where, all the Black people get together and party and celebrate. And even if you didn't attend TSU, it's just always been, I think, a staple in the Black community in Nashville.
And if we go back in time to 1968, Rita Geyer was part of this community, teaching at TSU. And she could see that there was a very clear example of a public white school being treated very differently than this public Black school. The University of Tennessee had a night school in Nashville, and it was expanding. It had just gotten approved for a brand new building downtown. And Rita Geyer's complaint was like, okay, this is a school that's almost all white. It's getting all of these state resources. And 3 miles away on Jefferson Street, there's a much more established public school that is all Black that is not getting the resources it needs.
The whole basis of the suit that UT Nashville was going to perpetuate a dual system of higher education, separate and unequal.
This is Dr. George Pruitt, who back in 1975 was a young college administrator. He'd just gotten hired to be the vice president of student affairs at TSU, a big deal for his career.
I was excited about going to Tennessee State for that. I did not know that I was walking into a war.
Chapter 1, The War.
The reason for the war is this. The Geyer case was being fought in court, and the state's official position was, look, there is nothing wrong with having 2 public universities in Nashville. Like, we're going to build a great UT Nashville, and Black people will go there too, and so that solves the whole segregation problem.
Right, except for the fact that the whole reason for the Geyer case was because TSU wasn't getting enough funding. So it seems like they're kind of avoiding the issue here.
Yes, exactly. And it's obvious to many people at TSU at this time what is going to happen. Like, if you have a second university in the same city, TSU will now be competing for funding. It will get even less funding. And one day it will just fade away. And that might be what happened if the state hadn't hired a new president of TSU just before George Pruitt got there. A tall, burly man named Dr. Fred Humphreys, who would become the general of this war.
Thank you very much for coming and sharing with us this information. And I'd like to inform you.
And he's this super young guy as far as college presidents go. He was 38 or 39 at the time. He had never been a college president before. He was a chemistry professor by training, which is like not exactly what I think about when I think about student affairs.
Yeah.
Also, Fred was Black at a Black school. in a time in our country, in time in Tennessee, where the presidents of black colleges were expected to be compliant and obedient.
He was expected to come in and just go along with the state and be like, everything is fine. We'll just keep these two universities the way they are.
And Fred was not compliant, and he took his obligation as the principal defender of the university very seriously.
You can see this in the record. Right after he was hired, but before he even started, he was interviewed by the Tennessean, and he said in that interview that the state's plan to have two universities in Nashville wasn't going to work, and that TSU should be the only institution getting the resources, which was, heresy at the time. And then at his very first Board of Regents meeting, where he was meeting with the board that oversaw TSU, George Pruitt describes a story that he heard about Fred Humphreys going to the bathroom right after the meeting. And the story goes that two of the top officials followed him into the bathroom and basically were like, listen, if you don't step in line, you're not going to be here very long.
Wow.
They basically told him they were going to fire him. And I'll never forget what Fred said. And this is what he told me, he said. I mean, I wasn't in the bathroom when this took place. He said, I got a problem. If I do what you asked me to do, I'm going to sell out the institution that I had. I'm going to sell out its history and tradition, and I'm going to sell out the interest of black people in this state and all over the country. And I would so alienate myself from my constituents, I wouldn't be able to lead this place anyway. If I'm true to those things, you're going to fire me. So given the choices, I'd rather take the consequences.
What a conversation to have in the bathroom.
And then actually Lawrence, his son, offered another part of the story, which may be apocryphal, we don't know, where he said that afterward, Fred Humphreys offered to settle it right there, man to man.
That is funny. Squaring up in the bathroom is funny. They could have settled it then and solved us years of controversy.
That began just a simmering and sometimes exploding resentment of Fred Humphreys.
What happened after that was the siege started.
Chapter 2, The Siege.
They started investigating the hell out of us.
The siege came in the form of investigations and audits and legislative hearings.
And we had some deficits because they had been starving the institution's resources for years. And we had some real challenges.
At one point in the middle of winter, the heat went out on TSU's campus. Thousands of students were in the dorms without heat.
They tried to say that was because of the college's incompetence, but the university documented it had been requesting for years funding to replace and service an outdated heating plant, and the funds had been denied.
And George Pruitt believes that each of these crises was being exploited to discredit Fred Humphreys. There was another big investigation where TSU was accused of padding its enrollment numbers because its computer system had crashed, so they didn't flunk anyone out for a while. And that issue was at one point used as a reason to put Humphreys on probation.
I mean, it was really dirty.
And they were dealing with this while they were also running a university with thousands of students.
When I say we were literally working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, it was true. I remember on Christmas, I opened up presents with my daughter and went to work on Christmas Day. All of us were. We worked. We did not holidays, weekends. We didn't take vacations. We were exhausted.
How did you feel during this? I mean, it sounds stressful. It sounds maybe scary. Were you ever scared about your physical safety?
Well, we knew we were at war. We knew that our jobs were at stake. We knew that if we lost, we were all going to get fired. But you'll have to remember, this was in the middle 70s. You know, Martin Luther King had been killed in 68. So we knew what we were up against. We knew what the consequences, we even knew what the odds were. They were not with us. But we didn't care.
And so the only break they'd have was on Friday nights. The whole administration would leave the school together.
We'd go out at happy hours and drink and party and dance. He liked to dance. And we would go to this place called Deborah's. And we'd all be sitting there drinking. Jack Daniels, mostly.
It's those Friday nights when my dad would let his hair down.
This is Fred Humphreys' son, Lawrence. He was in grade school at the time.
And they would get on the grill and make ribs and pulled pork, and they would drink brown liquor and Jack Daniels. and they'd have so much fun together. And my mom and her friends would have so much fun because during the rest of the week, it was tense.
Fred Humphreys kept on defending the school and kept insisting that it wasn't going to work to have two universities in Nashville. And the pressure just kept coming and coming.
I mean, there were nights where people would call and hang up, right? Someone threw a brick through my sister's window. We used to have security outside, sitting in the back of the house and the front of the house. I mean, this was full on, Mississippi burning type stuff. And I never forget, one of the biggest arguments my parents had is that my mom had written a check and it bounced. And my father got a call from the bank and he just was so upset. And I remember this because I was there. He told my mom, this can't happen to us. We can't bounce. We can't make a mistake. They're looking for pretense to fire me. And so I cannot have anything that looks like poor judgment. Anything. I have to be above reproach, which means my family has to be above reproach.
Fred Humphreys had to do this balancing act because technically he worked for the state. But even when the Geyer case goes to trial in 1976, he gets on the stand and tells an attorney for the other side, Avon Williams, that he agrees with them. UT Nashville should merge with TSU.
What I was told is that the last question that Avon asked Fred was, has anyone tried to threaten you or intimidate you to distort your testimony? And Fred said, yeah. And he named it. Well, we all knew, well, we're gonna get fired.
And then something remarkable happens, which is that they don't get fired. In fact, the judge comes out with a decision that agrees with Fred Humphreys. He says, yes, in order to achieve desegregation, you can't have two universities with these kinds of demographics in the same city. So keep the pre-existing university, TSU, and fold this new university, UT Nashville, into it.
That had never happened before in the history of this country. Every other case, a court-ordered desegregation merger meant you shut down the black school, you send the black kids to the white school. But this was the first time at any level, K through 12, where the black institution survived.
And even when the ruling got appealed, the appeals court comes to the same conclusions, that these two universities have to merge.
And that's why TSU has a building downtown, right? The Avon Williams building?
Yes, that used to be the site of UT Nashville. TSU got the building, it got the faculty, it got the students. This was going to repay the debt that the state of Tennessee owed TSU for neglecting it for decades.
I remember a lot of celebration.
Lawrence Humphreys again.
I remember when that happened, my father thought he was going to be at Tennessee State the rest of his career.
For one brief shining moment, the good guys won. All things ended well. There was truth and justice and the American way. It hadn't existed before then. It hasn't existed after then.
He didn't realize that 5 years later, that the culture and environment of Nashville and the university was so toxic for him that he would have to leave.
So what do you do when the repayment comes with strings attached?
That's coming up after the break. I'm Emily Seiner.
And I'm Camelia Burris.
And you're listening to The Debt, a special from Nashville Public Radio and the Tennessee Lookout.
I want people to understand exactly how big of a deal this was, merging UT Nashville with TSU. When TSU was created back in 1912, it was for the education of Black people. It was created because the state of Tennessee did not want to let Black people into other public universities. It was a way to maintain segregation.
And now it was going to be like
the premier university in Nashville, public university in Nashville.
Yeah, and afforded the resources that came with that, would be afforded the respect that came with that.
My dad's vision for Tennessee State was to make it 20,000 students, grow all the professional programs, all the PhD programs, get the best and brightest kids, Black or white, into that institution.
Fred Humphreys has been battling this war. He's won, And now he's ready. He's got this vision. The university will continue to excel at providing opportunities for Black students. That was its founding mission. But now that we have all these additional resources, it's going to be a great choice for everyone.
Build Tennessee State into the strongest institution in the state of Tennessee, regardless of makeup.
But also, it was very important to him that the administration was mostly Black.
Yeah.
And that the culture was still Black.
Yeah.
I think he felt like he was going to make this institution a model for how integration is supposed to work. I'm going to show you that a Black man can create an institution that looks like a post-Jim Crow civil rights institution.
But then there was this competing vision that was, okay, you guys are now the university in Nashville. You are the UT now. Mm-hmm. We have your name, we have your people, but the Blackness has nothing to do with it. We're past that. We're in a post-racial society here in 1979. And I think very quickly that came to a head where it was these are not the same vision.
Chapter 3, The Ultimatum.
The ultimatum came about 5 years after the merger. By this point, many white students who came over from UT Nashville had dropped out, and not as many white students were signing up. And there was a group of white professors who blamed Fred Humphreys, and they said because he cared so much about Black identity at TSU, that was leading to resegregation. And what's interesting is that buried in this argument, there is this idea that TSU still wasn't being properly funded by the state, that the living conditions on campus weren't good, and the academic programs weren't competitive enough. And that's why white students didn't want to go there. But the race issue got most of the attention. And so in 1984, the judge in the Geyer case said, okay, enough is enough. We need to write a settlement. And here's what he wrote.
No party denies that greater progress can and must be made toward eliminating the dual system of higher education in Tennessee.
So he writes in the settlement that in order to make progress, TSU should set a goal that within 10 years, you should aim for 50% of your undergrads to be white, and the professors.
At least 50% white faculty and at least 50% white upper-level administrators.
And the settlement did say that the state needed to improve TSU's facilities to bring them up to par with other public universities. But in order to get that, it had to give up its identity. And this is decades before we were arguing about DEI.
No institution will be identified as a one-race institution or a predominantly one-race institution.
TSU could no longer associate itself with Black culture. Its president could no longer say that the school served the Black community.
The heart of the problem is a traditionally Black TSU.
That was bullshit.
That's George Pruitt again. He was like, really? The problem that public colleges were still segregated in 1984, that was TSU's fault?
Being a historically Black college was our history, will always be our history, should always be our history. That history should be celebrated and preserved. And so if Black students could receive a fair and excellent education at an institution where the president was white, where the faculty was predominantly white, why could not white students get a fair and quality education at a university where the faculty was predominantly Black and the administration was predominantly Black? Tell me why that couldn't happen.
Knowing what we know about Fred Humphreys, why would he agree to that settlement?
Well, the way his son Lawrence describes it, this settlement was an ultimatum.
The state had, put him and the university in a vice script. And the only way the university had a chance of really surviving was to agree to these measures and agree to these compromises.
For years, Fred Humphreys had been trying to get the state to care about TSU, to invest in TSU. That was the whole point of fighting for the merger. And the settlement did promise that. It would fund improvements to the building, it would enhance special programs, but it was all for the explicit purpose of attracting white students, which is the opposite of what Fred thought was TSU's mission. Do you remember how we felt about that?
I can't really speak to what his actual thoughts were. But knowing my father the way that I did, it had to be painful, extremely painful. He's like, I have to get out of here because I'm now violating my integrity.
Fred Humphrey's time in Tennessee had been one fight after another. He felt like he couldn't actually lead the university. So he left.
A Board of Regents committee at Florida A&M notified the TSU president he had been picked to lead their university.
He took a job as president of another public HBCU, Florida A&M.
The Florida committee picked Humphreys in part because of his experience with desegregation at TSU.
He would serve there for 16 years. He would restart their law school.
I felt it was important to rectify history and the justice of history.
He started a successful scholarship program.
And so it's because Dr. Humphreys believed in me that I went on to receive my PhD in electrical engineering from Florida A&M.
Enrollment on campus doubled. At one point, he recruited more National Achievement Scholars than Harvard.
He was crisscrossing the nation, personally recruiting National Achievement Scholars.
He was so beloved that when he died in 2021, he was called one of the most transformative people in American higher education. I hear all that and wonder if that could have happened in Tennessee, if Fred Humphreys hadn't felt like he had to leave. Instead, what Tennessee got was a lot of hand-wringing over how to get more white students to sign up at TSU. The settlement had wanted the university to lose its Black identity, but the student body was still mostly Black, so it's not like you can just magically disappear Black culture from campus.
Ebony magazine every year published the Black College Queens issue, where they had a profile of the Miss Tennessee states and the Miss Jackson states, of all of the historically Black colleges, and a profile on each one. And he refused to allow Miss Tennessee State to be in the magazine.
The Miss HBCUs in Ebony magazine was the biggest deal for me growing up. And actually, a funny story in our family is that my brother famously used the Ebony magazine to look through and find the prettiest girls at the HBCUs to pick where he wanted to go to college. Admittedly, he was an unserious student, but that's just goes to show they were kind of like celebrities to us.
Yeah, okay, so that makes a lot of sense why Miss TSU was so pissed in 1986 when she found out that she was not allowed to be in Ebony because a white administrator at TSU was like, well, we can't do this under the terms of the settlement. Ebony is promoting Black colleges, and we can't call ourselves Black.
But that outraged everybody, and all over the state of Tennessee. People in Memphis and Chattanooga and Knoxville and Nashville were outraged. The alumni was outraged, and it created a political firestorm.
So in that way, the settlement did not work. And it also didn't work in that every time TSU tried to get more money, there was a fight. 4 years after the settlement, the governor budgeted $22 million to improve TSU's buildings because they had asbestos in the dorms. And a state official accused Black lawmakers of striking a political deal for the money.
And that probably explains what happens next.
Students hope to prove they are serious about their demands for changes at TSU. They marched today for improved living conditions.
By 1990, the problems with TSU's buildings were not fixed. Students said the dorms were moldy and infested, so was the student center.
So we had an old campus center, dusty, leaking, roaches, rats, all kind of stuff.
This is Antonio Terry. He was involved in student leadership at TSU.
Were you on student government?
No, I was what do you call people like in agencies?
Bureaucrat?
Yeah, I was a bureaucrat. I was a student bureaucrat.
The student government decided to take action. They led an occupation of the president's office.
Student government took over the building, locked it down. So the next day, the president couldn't get in the building. And they're like, what the hell is going on?
Antonio Terry wasn't one of the leaders of the protest, but he says he suggested where the students should go next. They should take over TSU's downtown campus, the building that used to be the site of UT Nashville, now named for Avon Williams, one of the Black attorneys in the Geyer case.
I said, look, the reason why TSU is in this situation in the beginning is because of UT Nashville. So why don't we go take over that campus and have our protest? We marched from TSU campus all the way down 8th Avenue, all the way down to the downtown campus, saying we shall overcome, like Martin Luther King.
The 5-mile trek ended up with a sit-in at TSU's downtown campus.
It was a list of items we wanted, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way down the line.
I think I can safely say that we'll still be here until our rights are obtained.
For 14 days, students stayed inside the Avon Williams building downtown.
Secretaries and other university employees tried to work around the students occupying their offices this morning with limited success.
We're doing a lot of whistling, a lot of dancing, a lot of holding hands, and a lot of praying together.
The community leaders told the demonstrators that they are behind them for as long as it takes to improve conditions at the university.
We are talking about freedom and justice for Tennessee State University, which has been long overdue.
The state is who is to really blame.
Eventually, some of the students stopped eating. It became a hunger strike. And if the public wasn't paying attention before, they were now.
The news people came in and they went into the rooms and they saw the asbestos. They filmed it and showed the public is looking at it on the news like, these students not lying. Look at this. How can they live in this kind of condition? And that's what won the public over.
For the first time, TSU student leaders had progress to report to weary demonstrators.
Hot water in dormitories, blinking electricity in particular dormitories, non-working showers in the dormitories.
All these problems will be worked on by next week, according to an apparent agreement with the university's president.
So you used the word ultimatum earlier to describe the Geyer settlement. This seems like an ultimatum in reverse. It was students saying, we're willing to starve ourselves for public attention until you give us more funding.
Yeah, it really was remarkable. And what was also remarkable was just how quickly it worked. Within a week, the State Building Commission met to discuss new projects at TSU, and the governor showed up, which was apparently unusual. And he wanted to make sure that TSU's projects happened quickly. And this would eventually lead to tens of millions of dollars in additional funding. In the early 2000s, the judge for the Geyer case hired an outside mediator to come up with a new settlement, one that all the parties actually liked. This version didn't say anything about TSU's racial makeup in particular, although it said all public universities had to recruit more, quote, other race students. It also promised to review the buildings on TSU's campus and invest in its programs. And in 2006, after 38 years, Rita Geyer's case was finally dismissed. The judge declared that when it came to public higher education in Tennessee, any remaining vestiges of segregation have been removed. It sounds so confident, so final. But then I came across this press conference from that day.
In some ways, this journey is ended. We're concluding this lawsuit.
You can tell that the governor of Tennessee at the time, Phil Bredesen, was thrilled that this chapter of state history was finally over. But he also sounded cautious.
In other ways, the journey still stretches far out before us, and it won't be complete until we remove every kind of barrier that stands in the way of any Tennessean's dream to earn a college education.
It turns out, for all the decades of fighting, the Geyer case missed a barrier that was hiding in plain sight.
That's coming up after the break. I'm Camelia Burris.
And I'm Emily Seiner.
And you're listening to The Debt, a special from Nashville Public Radio and the Tennessee Lookout.
Camelia, we've spent a lot of time talking about the Geyer case.
Yes.
But what I find interesting is that in the end, the final settlement was really about how do we make our entire public higher education system more diverse and equitable. And this came with some additional money and improvements specifically for TSU. But it didn't say, look, you failed to give TSU this amount of money back in the day, and therefore you owe it now.
True, and that's how we got to...
Chapter 4, The Calculation.
The calculation starts with a state representative and TSU alum named Harold Love.
That's part, I think, the genius of HBCUs is that you have that environment where, when I step on TSU's campus, I'm not Representative Love no more, right? You know, I'm their classmate.
So one of the things that makes HBCUs so special is that they're all about tradition. They're all about creating a legacy and passing the torch. And Harold Love says his parents wanted to make sure that he cared about TSU just as much as they did.
I would spend time at my mother's office, Tennessee State. I would spend time at my father's office at the Capitol. And my father, I think, wanted to set the groundwork for me to know what he was doing.
His father worked as a state representative serving the area around TSU, and his mother taught there. So his parents would talk about this over dinner.
And so there were conversations oftentimes about Tennessee State's funding and the work he was doing, trying to get money for the school.
And those conversations stayed with him when he followed in his father's footsteps and became a state representative in 2012. His father had passed away by this point, but Love kept his memory alive. He moved into his father's old office at the state capitol and even got his old phone number.
The license plates, those are his. This is one of the first bills he passed, 1973.
So definitely someone who's very connected to his family and who very much desires to carry on the work his father did and live up to the legacy of his father. Around the same time, he goes back and forth to his family's house. He's going through things of his father's to bring into the office.
And so on the desk, there is this report, right, that says the special financial needs of Negro universities.
It was just like a report. It's from 1970 or so, and he doesn't think much of it.
Got the report, put it in the box, gonna carry it back. I don't get around to reading it.
And then as a young lawmaker, he's meeting with his constituents. He speaks with the Dean of Agriculture at TSU.
I said to him, let me know if there's anything I can do to help. He told me, well, if you can help us get our state match for our agricultural funds, that would be tremendous.
So when Love says state match for agriculture funds, this is what he's talking about. TSU is one of 2 land-grant universities in the state. The other is the University of Tennessee. And the whole idea of land grants is that Congress donated land or money in the 1800s so that every state could build colleges that focus on agriculture, science, and engineering. These schools get federal funding for certain programs, and the states are required to match it.
And so we got a report from TSU just showing that 2000 to 2007, they received no matching funds for any of their land grant categories.
Which was odd, and Love wondered, what about before 2000? But the school didn't have that information.
So on a day like this on a Friday, what I would do is go upstairs, looked in the library, and I chose a year. I said, well, let me see how much TSU may have been underfunded in 1962. And to my surprise, it wasn't that TSU was underfunded by a certain amount. It was TSU didn't have anything in the budget. Like there was no line item for a land grant.
Year after year, there was nothing for TSU, yet there was plenty of land grant matching money for UT.
So what we found was University of Tennessee was getting more than a 1-to-1 match. Sometimes they were getting a 4-to-1, 3-to-1. And so that bolstered our argument even more to say, this is why it's important to give Tennessee State their matching funds, because we can point to evidence that Tennessee State has not received their 1-to-1 match.
Why do you think that happened?
Why would the state of Tennessee not fund a university that's educating kids? I can't think of a rational reason why. And so my mind has to go to, well, you must have not thought that the kids at this school were as valuable as the other school. You must not have thought that there was a need to fund them at the same level. And that can only be based in a discriminatory view that believes those kids are inferior, right?
But even with his research, he's having trouble getting his colleagues on board.
And so the disconnect was, I'm saying, no, TSU's been underfunded. But to throw that broadly out there, like, well, what do you mean underfunded? Like, you didn't get what you asked for last year? No, for the last 30 years. Well, what do you mean?
And they're brushing him off because he's young and they have other priorities. He's this junior lawmaker. They're not taking him that seriously.
And I'm frustrated. And I'm at my house, right? I think I started going through my boxes of stuff that I brought from my father's office.
Then he hears a voice.
Read the report.
Representative Love is a man of faith, a pastor who leads a church in North Nashville. It's actually the church that I grew up in. He says his faith has always guided his decisions. And so he pulled out the report that he brought from his father's office, the one about financial needs of Negro colleges.
And when I read it, I said, wow, this is exactly what I needed.
So the 1970 legislative report said that year, TSU had only received $51,600 of the $4.5 million in federal land grant funds given to Tennessee. It was proof that Harold Love Jr. was not making it up. The legislature itself had been talking about this almost 50 years earlier.
I could then make the case that Tennessee State University had not been getting its funding, and there was research done in the 1970s that spoke to this, and here we still are at this present age.
He holds up his father's report on the floor of the Tennessee House in 2016.
To renew this motion, discussion on the bill, Representative Love.
I asked the Speaker if I could address the bill sponsor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, Tennessee State University is our second land grant in this state. It had to be formed because students of color weren't allowed to go to UT. Now, each land grant gets money from the federal government.
And I started reading from the report.
As I was looking through my father's old notes, I found a report from 1970 called The Special Financial Needs of Negro Universities.
I can only imagine how Representative Love must feel to really be able to do that and take the baton from his father and to give his father the credit that he probably didn't get, when I can only imagine what it was like for a black lawmaker in Tennessee to try to get things through.
It allowed me to say the discovery that I made was made almost 50 years ago.
In 1970, Tennessee State was getting 1% of the land grant dollars from the state of Tennessee.
And so as I start reading the report, the chair of education comes over and says, we got it. We understand, and we're gonna fix it.
This is Love's first victory. The state of Tennessee starts to fund the full state match going forward, and it starts giving the university $1 million a year to make up for the back pay. But Love knows that's not enough. He just doesn't have the records from the decades before to see how much money was owed. And then
tonight, cries of Black Lives Matter and hands up, don't shoot. Hands up, don't shoot. Echoing from coast to coast.
Timing also matters here. The police killing of George Floyd in 2020 sparked racial justice movements throughout the country, and many people in positions of power were making attempts to address these injustices.
To his credit, Cameron Sexton, at the time Speaker, called us into the office and said, look, what is happening? You know, are there instances you can point to where we're not treating African Americans right in Tennessee? So my hand goes up. Yeah. I said, Tennessee State's matching funds. So he said, look, I've been hearing you talk about this for quite some time. I really want to know, how much is it? Because I don't want you to keep thinking that we're just eating around the edge.
The speaker sets up a committee to determine exactly how much is owed to TSU. Finally, Love is given the time to go through budget records, all the way back to the 1950s. And this committee comes up with a number. Tennessee has shortchanged TSU by as much as $544 million, and that didn't even count for inflation.
New tonight, some state lawmakers agree Tennessee State University is owed millions of dollars in back pay from the state for funds being withheld from TSU's agriculture department.
And Love knew he had to strike while the iron was hot.
At that moment, we also had the right mix. We had a speaker who was informed about the underfunding. Lieutenant Governor was aware of it and on the same page. So I said, look, we got 2 years, because if any one of these changes out, and the governor, right? If anyone changes out, then we got to go back and explain again.
So things are looking up for TSU. In 2022, the legislature approved $250 million for the university to make infrastructure improvements. And then in February 2023,
the state comptroller released a new audit of TSU's operations and its finances.
There's a scathing report from the state comptroller. It details Tennessee State's financial failings.
The comptroller found the school disregarded basic financial management guidelines,
including students not receiving the scholarships they were promised and freshmen having to live in hotels because the school didn't have enough housing.
When the report comes out, my first thought was, I don't need this, right? I don't need anything distracting from the story of underfunding. I don't need another competing story coming up and saying, yes, there's underfunding, but also there's this, right?
And he's right. This becomes a story for multiple years. There are legislative hearings, the president of TSU resigns, then the governor comes in and says the entire board of trustees of TSU should be replaced.
A Republican lawmaker just filed a bill to get rid of the board that runs the school.
At the state capitol, Harold Love is trying to do damage control, get the focus back on returning the land grant money.
I tell folks all the time, I say, listen, two things can be true. You can have underfunding, and you can have some fiscal policies that were not followed.
And then another bombshell drops. The Biden administration puts out a report with their own calculation of how much Southern states have underfunded their historically Black land-grant universities over the last 30 years.
The federal government says TSU is owed more than $2 billion by the state of Tennessee.
And to be clear, the Biden administration report is doing a different calculation. It's not looking at the state matching money for land-grant programs. It's looking at how much states have spent per pupil at their 2 land-grant universities. And it finds that Tennessee is spending a lot less on TSU students than at UT.
So not only is it a much larger number than what Love calculated, but it's the largest in the country.
Federal leaders say HBCUs all across the country have missed out on funding, and TSU has missed out on the most.
And so on one side, you had people saying, why are we giving TSU any more money when their leadership has been mismanaging its finances? And on the other side, you have people saying, why are you asking for $500 million when we're owed 4 times that? And Love is in the middle saying, let's not lose sight of the goal here.
The challenge is, how long can we keep making the case for underfunding? We should always be able to make the case. But you're also dealing with human beings and people.
TSU now has a new president who seems to have a good relationship with the state. And of course, the Biden administration is a distant memory. But Love is still trying to recover another couple $100 million.
And is that it? If he can secure $544 million, and he will consider the debt to TSU paid?
Well, no. There's data missing from even before the 1950s. So basically, from when TSU was started up until the 1950s, he doesn't have the exact numbers to know how much land-grant money the state was supposed to match for TSU, but didn't.
Okay, so we could go back even further in the records, but this is still all just talking about the state's land-grant matching funds for agriculture programs. So it's a tiny slice of the funding pie for TSU. I just have to feel like that number, whatever it is not it.
Exactly.
Yeah, that would be a start. You know, that's a good faith start, but that's nowhere near settling the debt.
Dr. Crystal Sanders is a professor of African American Studies at Emory University. She's identified another slice of funding that was unfairly taken from public HBCUs across the South. So during segregation, Black students couldn't go to UT, and TSU had very few graduate programs. So Tennessee passed a law in 1937 saying that the state would pay for them to go to grad school out of state.
Such payments shall be made out of the funds appropriated by the state for the Agricultural and Industrial College for Negroes. Tennessee A&I is present-day Tennessee State University.
The money to send Black students out of state because UT wouldn't accept them came out of TSU's budget?
Yes.
That is wild.
We can clearly see how these institutions are being robbed, literally robbed, to preserve segregation.
And segregation scholarships, as Crystal Sanders calls them, worsen the financial strains on public HBCUs that were already struggling with poor state funding.
We have to remember that these states had choices. Instead of sending Black students out of state, they could have created graduate and professional school programs at Black colleges. We will never know what could have been had there been pharmacy schools, law schools, medical schools, master's degree programs that are revenue generating put at these institutions in the 50s and 60s or even in the 40s.
When I started this story, I really wanted to come up with a number, a definitive number of what the debt was so that we could say, you know, if we can just fund TSU this much, then the debt will be paid. And we've seen how each generation has sort of tried to calculate this. You know, the Geyer case was a general acknowledgement that the state had treated TSU poorly. And it was sort of like, okay, can we give you another campus with strings attached? Or can we sort of improve your buildings? It felt very reluctant. And then Harold Love comes along and is like, I'm actually going to do the math, but he's focused on such a small piece of the puzzle. And now we have Crystal Sanders saying there's so much more. The research hasn't even been done yet.
Right. Her point is that it's on Tennessee and every other southern state to do the research and do the math themselves, not because they feel like it, but because they care about their financial integrity.
You know, this isn't charity. You don't do this and pat yourself on the back. This isn't Mackenzie Scott saying, ooh, I'm going to throw $60 million at you. No, this is saying, you know what? We owe you some money that was promised to you based on what our Constitution says. And we've got to make that right. We've got to make you whole. This is about a debt that the state owes, and states have to pay their debts.
Hearing Crystal Sanders say that, I think about how I didn't go to an HBCU. I don't have a personal family connection to TSU. I think a lot of people in power are the same. But this debt that the state owes affects all of us. We have missed out on having a well-funded public land-grant university in the state capital that could have brought more good-paying jobs and more innovation and more students to the state.
And not even just that, more people would have had the chance for social mobility. At TSU, it's about 60% of the students that are eligible for the Pell Grant, which means they're in great financial need. But if they graduate, they have access to all these new opportunities. And that's why much of Nashville's Black middle class is a product of TSU. And I've heard this sentiment from everyone I talk to, including students who are on campus right now.
You know, me being from Memphis, I see TSU's impact every day, from its educators that it's breeded to politicians.
We have, as a society and as a state, have become too comfortable with TSU and schools like us doing what we can with less. And that paradigm has to end somewhere.
You know, one thing we've been hearing in all the interviews for this story, including the students that you talked to on campus, was look at what this institution has managed to do, even with inadequate funding. And if it's accomplished this much so far,
imagine what it could do with the proper funding that it's owed.
The Debt is a production of Nashville Public Radio and the Tennessee Lookout, with additional support from the Pulitzer Center and the Education Writers Association. This story was co-reported and co-produced by Camelia Burris and me, Emily Seiner. Story editing by Maribel Knight and Miriam Kramer. Additional editing by Tony Gonzalez, Holly McCall, Joshua Moore, LaTanya Turner, and Nina Cardona. Sound design by Joshua Moore. Fact-checking by Daniel Potter. Digital build-out by Mac Linebaugh and Megan Jones. Our academic advisors for the story were Dr. Learotha Williams at Tennessee State University and Dan Sharfstein at the Vanderbilt Law School.
And we also want to thank everyone who helped us access archival materials. Sharon Smith at Tennessee State University, Rick Locker at the Tennessee Board of Regents, Boyd Sandler at WKRN, Eddie Weeks from the Tennessee Legislative Library, and Sarah Myers at the Tennessee State Library and Archives.
Thank you also to Barbara Merle and Jacqueline Mitchell at TSU, Tyra Hogg at UT Nashville, TSU alumni Jeff Carr and Roger Klatt, and Geyer case mediators Carlos Gonzalez and Wendy Thompson.
Also, Crystal Day Gregory at Bethune-Cookman University, Stephen Mobley at Morgan State University, Melissa Mazak at Thomas Edison State University, Clark Buckner, and Fred Humphreys Jr.
If you want to support this kind of in-depth reporting, please donate to the nonprofit newsrooms that produced it at WPLN.org and TennesseeLookout.com. Thanks for supporting and for listening.